We do not inherit chaos by accident. It is engineered, manufactured, and then handed down like an unwanted legacy. What we call a security crisis in Burkina Faso did not emerge from nowhere. It is the product of decades of manipulation, extraction, abandonment, and betrayal. When I stood before this nation and took an oath to serve, I was not stepping into power. I was stepping into fire, a nation under siege, a people who could no longer sleep without fear, mothers who sent their children to school in the morning unsure if they would return by sunset. Villages swallowed by silence after gunshots, entire provinces, yes, entire regions, declared no-go zones, not because our people were dangerous, but because our land was made lawless through neglect. You cannot talk about security in Africa without talking about its colonial hangover. You cannot talk about terrorism without asking, who armed these groups? Who benefits from the instability? Who sits comfortably in foreign capitals negotiating peace agreements while we bury our dead and shelter our children under bullets? We are not simply fighting terrorism. We are fighting a system that has normalized our suffering, a system that has turned our pain into policy. But let me be clear, we are not victims. We are witnesses. And more importantly, we are the resistance. We are the generation that refuses to let foreign militaries dictate our future while calling it partnership. We are the young people who are saying, if our ancestors fought for independence with their bare hands, then we, too, must fight for dignity with our minds, our courage, and our unity. Not tomorrow. Now, I say this to every young Burkinab. Your fear is valid, but your silence is no longer acceptable. We are not the children of war. We are the architects of peace. But peace that we define. Peace that is rooted in sovereignty. Not the kind of peace that demands obedience in exchange for aid. Not the peace that trades your minerals for military bases. Not the peace that tells you to sit quietly while others build empires on your soil. Our security crisis is real. It has cost us lives, but it will not cost us our soul. The solution is not only in the barrel of the gun, it is in the awakening of our people. It is in the leadership of youth. It is in refusing to believe the lie that we are weak, divided, or incapable of standing on our own. So yes, I inherited a nation in crisis, but I do not carry that crisis alone. You, the people, carry the power. And when the people rise, no force, no foreign agenda, no terrorist faction can stop the roar of a nation that remembers who it is. This is not the end of our story. This is where we begin. Let's speak the truth with clarity. Our economy was not designed for us. It wasn't built to nourish our people, empower our youth, or honor our labor. It was constructed like a cage, and worse, it was built by someone else's blueprint. When we inherited this so-called independence, what we were really handed was an economy stripped of sovereignty, an economy rigged to send our raw materials out and import back dependency. It's not a mistake that we are rich in resources yet poor in living. That's not bad luck. That's design. Look around. Gold beneath our feet. Cotton in our hands. Oil, manganese, cobalt, uranium. But what's left for the people? Where is the infrastructure? Where are the factories that turn our minerals into our wealth? Nowhere. Because from the very beginning, the goal was never to help us rise. It was to keep us useful. Colonizers didn't just build railroads and ports for convenience, they built pipelines of profit, outward. Their ships came in, and our wealth left. And decades later, even after the flags changed, the routes of extraction stayed the same. Contracts were written in foreign tongues. Banks were offshore. Decisions were made in air, conditioned offices continents away. About our labor, our land, and our future. Our people were taught to think small, sell raw cotton, not sew garments, export cashew, not process it, dig gold, but buy back our own jewelry at 10 times the price. And all the while, young Africans have been conditioned to believe that the dream is elsewhere. That dignity lies in escape, in visas, in remittances, in the myth of a better life far from home. But what if I told you the real revolution is not escape? It's return. not to the past, but to the roots of our power. It's time to unlearn the colonial economic lie. We are not beggars. We are not dependent. We are not waiting for aid. We are awakening to justice. Our youth must see entrepreneurship not as survival, but as sovereignty. Innovation is not a Western invention. It's our birthright. Look at the hands that built pyramids, that carved kingdoms out of deserts, that survived centuries of theft. These same hands can build industries, launch technologies, reclaim markets, but only if we stop exporting the best of ourselves for the profit of others. The economy we need is not one of extraction, but of regeneration, of life, of dignity, of rooted power. And that requires courage, courage to say no to exploitative deals, courage to educate our people in skills that serve our soil, not just the global machine, courage to be misunderstood, even mocked, by those who profit from our silence. Because the day we say, we will not sell what we cannot process, the world will listen. Not because we shouted, but because we finally stood up. And to the youth listening, your mind is your most valuable resource. Don't export it. Build with it. For your people, for your land, for a future that speaks your name with pride. You see, the economy isn't just about money. It's about power. It's about who decides what your labor is worth, who gets to eat and who has to beg, who owns the land and who keeps dying for it. When I talk to young people, I don't just hear frustration about unemployment. I hear a deeper kind of betrayal. You've gone to school. You've listened. You've waited. You were told, just do the right thing and the system will reward you. But here you are, still waiting, waiting for dignity, waiting for a place to stand, and that wait is suffocating. The economic challenges we inherited weren't accidental. They were designed through decades of extraction, manipulation, and elite compromise. We were given loans with no sovereignty. We were handed aid with strings that became nooses. Our industries were dismantled. Our natural wealth was exported. And our youth, you were told to leave. Told there was no future here. That your brilliance belonged in Europe. That your creativity was only valuable when it left your soil. That your hunger for purpose was too much for your homeland to hold. But I'm here to tell you the truth. It is not your hunger that's too much. It's the system that's too small. Every economy reflects the values it is built on. For too long, our economy was built on dependence. Dependency on foreign institutions, on foreign investors, on the illusion that freedom can be imported. But freedom isn't imported. It's cultivated. And the greatest resource we have is not beneath the ground. It's not gold. It's not oil. It's not cotton. It's you. Our challenge and our revolution is to redefine value, to move away from GDP numbers that rise while our dignity falls, to stop measuring development by how much we consume and start measuring it by how many of us rise. And that requires bold, indigenous thinking. It requires reimagining what an economy looks like when it is built on justice, not just profit. Young people, you were not born to be cheap labor for someone else's dream. You were not meant to migrate to survive. You were born to create, to build, to innovate right here, in the land of your ancestors, with the fire of your future in your hands. And if the current system cannot see your worth, then the system must change. Because you, not the currency, not the exports, not the debt, are the true wealth of this nation. And so, to the youth, I say this: our economic liberation is not a technical adjustment. It is a cultural awakening. And it begins when you stop apologizing for being powerful, when you stop shrinking to fit into a broken mold. Stand tall, dream loudly, and dare to demand an economy that serves your potential, not your silence. Because when the youth rise, economies follow, not the other way around. You see, one of the most dangerous myths ever sold to our people is the idea that safety must come at the expense of sovereignty. That in order to be protected, we must kneel. That in order to eat, we must beg. This false dichotomy between survival and dignity is a tool of control. It's a way to keep us fragmented, doubting our own capacity to turning our backs on one another, and it's worked. For too long it worked. Because when you grow up in a system that was not designed to protect your soul, only your submission, you begin to internalize fear as a way of life. But let me ask you, how can a people ever truly feel secure if their survival depends on the mercy of those who once enslaved them? If the food on your table, the medicine in your hospitals, the bullets in your guns are all imported from hands that still whisper, "You will never rise without us," then how can you look your children in the eye and promise them freedom? This is not just about economics or security, it's about identity. It's about the psychological chains that continue to bind us long after the physical ones were broken. And until we confront that, until we name that, we will keep repeating the same cycles, repackaged in different flags, signed by different treaties, enforced by newer uniforms. But it's the same game. So let's stop pretending that foreign aid is a gift. Let's stop pretending that debt relief is generosity. Let's call it what it is, leverage. Let's call it what it is, control. Because no one gives you billions without expecting your silence. No one arms your military without expecting you to defend their interests. No one invests in your land without expecting to own the fruits of it. But we are not here to be bought. We are not here to be traded. We are not here to wear borrowed clothes and act grateful. We are here to rebuild what was broken, but on our terms, with our hands, with our voices, with our ancestors watching and our children waiting. The youth must hear this, not as a history lesson, but as a call to action. You are not too young. You are not too powerless. You are not too late. You are precisely who this moment was made for. And if they say you dream too big, tell them you're not dreaming. You're remembering. You're remembering what it felt like to live with your back straight. You're remembering that your grandparents once walked proud before they were told to crawl. The time for remembering is over. Now we rise. So let's talk about something deeply uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary, the cost of being disconnected from ourselves and each other. Because when we speak about security and the economy, we're not just talking about policies and numbers. We're talking about people. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about how entire generations have learned to survive in survival mode, and how that shapes their ability to dream, to build, to connect. You see, when a nation is trapped under the weight of colonial trauma, the first thing to go is the trust between its people. Generations grow up watching promises broken, voices silenced, and futures mortgaged. You learn not to rely on anyone, not to expect too much, not to hope too hard. Because disappointment becomes a kind of inheritance. But let me tell you something. This is not normal, living constantly in a state of vigilance, fear, and self-protection. It's not strength. It's not resilience. It's damage that's been normalized. And what I want to challenge here today, especially for our youth, is the idea that we have to continue carrying it forward. The colonial powers did more than extract our resources. They fractured our bonds. They made trust dangerous. They made community fragile. And most dangerously of all, they made isolation feel like power. But we cannot build a secure society or a vibrant economy when we are afraid of one another. We cannot thrive when we are suspicious of connection, when we think vulnerability is weakness, when we're more comfortable competing than collaborating. And so, when I speak about repairing what was broken, I don't just mean roads and banks and markets. I mean hearts. I mean the invisible infrastructure of belief, unity, and emotional courage. I mean the spaces where our youth can come together, not to perform or impress, but to be real, to be whole, to dream again. Because economic growth without emotional health is just another form of exploitation. Security without inner peace is still a prison. What we need is not just recovery, we need liberation. And liberation is a psychological process as much as it is a political one. The revolution we need now is a revolution of relationship between citizens and leaders, between men and women, between generations. between our past and our future. This is not abstract. This is as real as the money in your pocket and the safety of your street. So let's break the cycle. Let's rebuild our inner economy, where dignity is the currency, where trust is the foundation, and where connection is our greatest asset. Because when we heal how we relate, we unlock something no colonizer could ever steal, our humanity. And with that, we become truly unstoppable. And now we must confront the hardest truth of all, the colonization of the mind. When a people have been physically chained, those chains can be broken. But when their thoughts, their aspirations, their sense of worth have been conditioned by centuries of inferiority, what do we do then? What happens when you no longer need a colonizer to control a nation because the nation has been taught to control itself? Through fear, through self-doubt, through the internalization of its own unworthiness. You see, the most dangerous legacy of colonialism is not just the stolen resources, the displaced families, or even the borders drawn in arrogance and ignorance. It's the invisible system that taught generations of Africans to see themselves as incapable of leadership, unworthy of sovereignty, and dependent on a foreign hand for stability. That mental cage is not made of steel. It is made of silence, of resignation, of a quiet despair that says, maybe we are not ready. And so, the youth inherit this silence, not because they choose it, but because it's all they've seen. They're told to wait their turn, to not be too loud, to not disrupt the process. But here's the revolution. I want you to understand: the process is broken. The process was designed to keep you out. Every generation is offered a script. Some accept it, some revise it, and then there are those rare few who burn the script altogether and write their own. That is your call. That is your responsibility. You were never born just to survive in this world. You were born to reshape it. When I look at the youth of Africa today, I don't see lost potential. I see suppressed potential. I see artists whose creativity was silenced in favor of conformity. I see thinkers whose brilliance was dismissed because they questioned too much. I see leaders who were told they must first wait their turn, when their turn is now. Let me be very clear: decolonizing the mind is not a metaphor. It is not a social media slogan. It is not a theoretical debate held in ivory towers. It is a war against the internalized belief that we must always ask for permission. Permission to speak, to build, to lead, to dream. We don't need permission anymore. Africa's liberation will not come from outside. It will come from within, from a new consciousness rooted not in fear, but in clarity, courage, and conviction. If we do not believe in our own minds, our own capacity to think independently and act decisively, then every other reform is just decoration. The youth must not only inherit the future, they must design it, mold it, command it. We are not waiting for history to remember us. We are here to make history uncomfortable until it makes room for us. And if you're still asking what your role is, I say this: your mind is your first battlefield. Win there, and the world will follow. Let's talk about something that's been systematically overlooked. Something that colonization did not just take from our lands, but from our very minds: the ability to trust one another in intimacy. When we speak of economic deprivation or political destabilization, we often overlook the emotional poverty that lingers behind. The crisis is not just in our borders or our economies. It's in our bedrooms. It's in our inability to be fully seen, to be fully vulnerable, and to truly connect. This is where I want to take us, into the psychological architecture that colonialism left behind. Because here's the truth: colonization was not just about taking gold, or minerals, or control of trade. It was about severing the psychological backbone of a people. It dismantled our ancestral systems of family, love, and trust, and replaced them with suspicion, domination, and emotional exile. You see, when people are colonized, they're taught to obey. They're taught to suppress. They're taught that silence is safer than speaking, and survival is more important than connection. So we inherit not just silence, but disconnection. Emotional exile passed down from generation to generation. Now we live in a time where we're supposed to be free, yet so many of us are still emotionally imprisoned. We speak of independence, yet we struggle to be interdependent. Our youth, our men and women, we talk about loyalty, but do we even know how to trust? We talk about building families, but do we even know how to stay? When you've been taught that love is a liability, that emotion is weakness, that control is power, intimacy becomes threatening, vulnerability becomes dangerous. I see it in young couples, in marriages, in friendships, in movements. Where closeness should bring strength, it instead brings fear. We push away the very thing we long for most: to be understood, to be valued, to be held, not for our productivity, but for our presence. And that is the deep colonial wound, a wound that no border treaty can heal, a trauma that no IMF loan can resolve. If we want to truly rise, not just economically, not just politically, but emotionally, we must decolonize our relationships. We must relearn how to trust, how to open, how to speak. And here's where our youth come in. You are not just fighting for land. You are not just fighting for sovereignty. You are fighting to reclaim the ability to love, to connect, to feel, without fear. You are the first generation that can choose to heal instead of inherit. That is your revolution. And it is as sacred as any flag or constitution, because a truly liberated people are not just those who can vote. They are those who can love without fear, lead without domination, speak without trembling, to reclaim your inner emotional life. That, too, is resistance. Let that sink in. Liberation is not only about what we take back. It is about what we learn to give again. When we talk about rebuilding a nation, especially one wounded by exploitation, corruption, and external manipulation, there's a fundamental question we must confront. What are we rebuilding for? And who gets to decide what progress looks like? This isn't just about roads and bridges. It's about identity. It's about reclaiming the right to imagine a future on our own terms. One of the most paralyzing challenges I inherited was the deeply embedded belief, conditioned over decades of colonization and post-colonial dependency, that our salvation must come from the outside, that somehow foreign experts, foreign aid, and foreign models of governance were better suited to fix our problems than the brilliance, courage, and creativity that already exists right here, within you, within us. Let's be clear, colonization was not just a theft of land, labor, and resources. It was a theft of imagination. It trained us to doubt ourselves, to look outward before looking inward, and to wait generation after generation for someone else to write our story. But what if the greatest revolution is not fought with weapons, but with belief? That is the work I invite you into. The rebuilding of that sacred trust between a people and their own capacity. That is what security must mean. Not just the absence of violence, but the presence of dignity. Not just border patrols, but food on the table. Medicine in the clinic, truth in the classroom. And when we speak of the economy, we must challenge the narrow frameworks we've been handed. We've been told that economic growth is measured by numbers on a screen. GDP, foreign investment, capital inflows. But how can you call it growth when the very soil that feeds you is owned by companies that have never stepped foot in your village? When your minerals fund skyscrapers abroad while your schools collapse? When youth are left unemployed in a land overflowing with opportunity? If only it weren't locked behind colonial contracts. So yes, we inherited chaos, but chaos is not the enemy. It is the raw material of transformation. And our young people are not underdeveloped, minds waiting to be trained. They are brilliant strategists of survival. They are makers, creators, fighters, and most of all healers of a wounded national soul. My call to you, then, is not just to protest or resist. My call is to build, with your hands, with your voice, with your intellect, with your imagination. Break the cycle of waiting. We are not here to inherit what was broken. We are here to create what was never given. Let them call it rebellion. We will call it rebirth. There's one challenge we rarely talk about, and yet it quietly controls the pulse of our nations, our dreams, our relationships. The crisis of psychological inheritance. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about the legacy of fear that colonization left behind. I'm talking about the generational trauma passed down from our grandparents who were told they were less than, from parents who were told not to question, from systems that taught us to survive, but not to thrive. We carry this not just in our laws or our economies, but in our nervous systems, in our capacity to trust, to connect, to build, to lead. This trauma doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't carry a flag, but it infiltrates our daily lives. It shows up in how we shrink ourselves, in how we doubt our potential, in how we silence our own voices before the world even gets a chance to hear us. It's not just post-colonial fatigue. It's emotional paralysis. It's the exhaustion of constantly trying to prove your worth to systems that were never designed to recognize it. And it shows up in our relationships too. We learn to distrust. We learn to disconnect. We learn that intimacy and vulnerability are liabilities, not strengths. But here's the truth: healing is possible. And it starts with reclaiming our stories. It begins the moment we stop seeing ourselves through the eyes of those who colonized us. It begins when we stop mimicking their models of power and start remembering our own. Our ancestors didn't just suffer. They resisted. They didn't just endure. They dreamed. They didn't just lose. They also loved, fought, built, protected. That's the legacy we're not taught in schools. That's the flame we must carry forward. Not to recreate the past, but to reclaim the future. And if you are young, if you are angry, if you are restless, good. That restlessness is not a defect. It is the friction of awakening. It is your body telling you that you were born for something more. It's not about rejecting your elders. It's about refusing to repeat their pain. We cannot honor the past by replicating it. We must transcend it. We must imagine what freedom feels like, not just in politics, but in the soul. Not just in borders, but in breath. So what does liberation actually look like? It's a young woman raising her voice in a room that once silenced her. It's a young man choosing to build rather than break. It's a generation saying, we will not inherit your fears. We will inherit your fire. That fire is the revolution. And let me tell you this, they may own the media, they may own the banks, they may own the narrative, but they will never own our spirit. That is our final line of defense and our greatest weapon. Let's talk about trust. Not just the kind of trust you speak about in soft tones between two people in love. I'm talking about something much deeper, something more collective. The trust between a people and their nation. The trust between generations, between what came before and what is to come. In times of political turbulence and economic instability, this trust is tested, eroded, sometimes even shattered. And when it breaks, the consequences are not just personal. They are societal. They are revolutionary. You see, colonization didn't just steal our land, our minerals, and our dignity. It broke the spine of trust. It told our ancestors they were not enough, that their knowledge systems were inferior, that their traditions were backward. And slowly, generation by generation, it planted this dangerous idea that we must be saved from ourselves. By foreign powers, by international institutions, by someone else, anyone else but us. That's how the machinery of dependency was built, not only in policy and economics, but in our very psyche. And today, we are still suffering from that inherited fracture. Many of our young people don't trust the state because the state has not protected them. They don't trust leaders because leadership has often meant betrayal. They don't trust promises because they've heard too many, seen too few kept. This is not apathy. This is not laziness. This is a response to historical trauma. And unless we address that, boldly, honestly, unapologetically, we will keep repeating the same broken cycles dressed in new slogans. So what does it mean to rebuild that trust? It means leadership must stop performing for foreign applause and start listening to the raw voices of its own people. It means educating our youth not to memorize colonially approved facts, but to critically examine the systems we live in, to question who benefits and who is silenced. It means healing isn't optional, it's essential. But healing doesn't come from silence. It comes from confronting the uncomfortable truths, from allowing anger to be transformed into action and fear into fuel. Young people, I speak to you directly now. You are not lost. You are not too late. You are not powerless. Your clarity, your restlessness, your demand for something real, that is your strength. And yes, it is dangerous to be awake in a world that profits off your sleep. But it is far more dangerous to remain numb, to accept what is given simply because it's familiar. The revolution we need is not only in policies or power structures, it's in perception. Rebuilding trust starts when we stop waiting to be saved and start realizing we are the saviors we've been waiting for. And when that trust begins to rise again, not in systems, but in each other, then no colonizer, no puppet, no outsider can ever break us again. Let us never confuse silence with peace. Let us never confuse obedience with unity. And let us never again trust the hands that built our chains to be the ones who set us free.